So guys, recently Apple put out a short film entirely shot with an iPhone, the iPhone 14 Pro in this case. And of course, the purpose of that video is to show how good the iPhone is, but I think also that they want to show that in the iPhone you can use the PRORES format. And this gives me the idea to share with you what I've learned on this PRORES feature. So normally in a video you can choose between most compatible and high efficiency, but talking about a little bit more technical, most compatible mean H.264, while high efficiency mean H.265, that is the newer codec that we have nowadays. But with the iPhone 13 Pro they also introduce a new codec called PRORES. Then guys, you have another option that is Dolby Vision or HDR video, but I suggest you to don't enable that mode because that mode is only for HDR content, and since nowadays most of the contents are SDR, so standard dynamic range, I suggest you to don't enable this option, because otherwise when you took that footage shot in HDR mode and bring in your editing software, you'll see that the images will be much brighter compared to the normal SDR footage. So in this video I'll share with you when you should use this new codec and when you should not use it, because it's not always the case to use it. I will talk also about the limitation that we have, especially on the iPhone that has only 128 gigs of storage. And for last, I'm going to say that this is a big lie from Apple, because this limitation is fake, I can say. Okay guys, to enable this mode, because you have to know that it is disabled by default, you have to go to the settings and then you have to scroll down to the camera section, and then on the top you will have the formats option. Click on it, and down on the bottom you'll see that there is an option called Apple PRORES, that if you now enable this mode, when you go down to the camera app, you will see that on the top there is a new tab called PRORES, and to activate you have to simply click on the icon and you have activated the PRORES. Yes, it's simple as that. But if you know a little bit of these technical aspects, you know that there is different flavors of PRORES, and in the case of the iPhone, the flavors that Apple adopted basically was the PRORES HQ, that is almost the higher flavor of PRORES. This means only one thing, unfortunately: data, because this codec is really data hungry, and since the iPhone has only the Lightning port, that is an old technology that reaches a speed around 60 megabits per second, when you will shoot a video in PRORES, especially in 4K, the data will be huge and transferring a lot of files could be an issue. But is it possible to scale down the weight of this PRORES? Unfortunately no, as long you use the native camera app. But if you use a third-party app like for example Beastcam, Filmic Pro or Cinema P3, you can decide a smaller flavor of PRORES, and my recommendation is PRORES Lite, because it is a good compromise between file size and image quality. But of course I encourage you to do your own test. So now that I've given you a little bit of information about this PRORES feature, let's discuss about the pros of the PRORES. So normally a codec choice is a compromise between three things: file size, image quality and editing performance. About the file size, I've already told you that the PRORES is a really hungry data codec, but with the PRORES Lite, for example, you can scale down on the file size of the video. About the image quality, we have to do a little bit of distinction between the H.264 and the H.265, because I've discovered that the H.264 has in some cases a lot more bending compared to the PRORES, and the noise is more compressed compared to the PRORES, so in the case that you have to do a further noise reduction, it's better to use the PRORES. On the H.265 is basically the same stories, but I've noticed that the situation on the bending is a little bit better, but the PRORES also in this case is a better choice. So in any case I think that the PRORES is slightly superior, but not so much. Don't expect a huge leap in image quality, because it's very similar with both, because the start is always a sensor from a phone. About the editing using performance, we have to consider the computer that we are using. Because for example, I'm using an iMac from 2019 fully spec'd out, and the result may different between the computer that you are using. But in my case, I can say that both the H.264 and the H.265 scrubbing with no problems, also in 4K. But about the export speed, if we want to make a scale, I can say that on the top there is the PRORES, followed from the H.264 and then followed up from the H.265. But you have to know that the difference between these three codecs are not huge. So I think that you don't need to make a choice for the export speed, but I think more for the image quality. But now guys, let's switch to the cons of using the PRORES, because especially if you don't plan to use a third-party app, you will have to manage with huge files, and again, since the iPhone has only the Lightning port, this is a thing that you have to take in consideration, because the transfer speed is not so high with the Lightning cable, and of course it's worse when you're using AirDrop. Also, another big cons of the PRORES is that you can use in the native camera app the 4K at 60 frames per second, even though you have a phone with more than 256 gigs of storage. But guys, you have to know that you can solve both problems, the huge files and the 4K at 60, with the third-party app. For my test, for example, I've used the Biscam app, but you can also use Filmic Pro and also Cinema P3. In that case, you will have also the 4K at 60 frames per second in PRORES. The only three issues on this route are the fact that, of course, first of all, these apps are not free, but is not so expensive, I can say. They are not easy to use like the native camera app, at least at first glance, because then you can get used. And I think that the stabilization of the third-party app is not good as in the native camera app. For example, I've tested with the wider lens and the tighter lens, and as you can see in these examples, the native camera app performed better. And you have to know that with the native camera app you can also use the action mode also with the PRORES. So on the stabilization side, this is a clear advantage on the native camera app. But on the side of a third-party app, you can have the full control of the image, so you can choose the white balance, the shutter speed, the ISO, and all the other things to control better an image. That in the end is the exact things that the crew of the Apple films did on the short films. Because you can see in the behind the scenes that sometimes they don't use the native camera app but a third-party app. So basically, depending on your needs, you will have to choose one of the other option to shoot your things. For example, on the behind the scenes of the short films by Apple, you can see that sometimes they've used the native camera app, and for other scenes they've used a third-party app, and in this case I think that they've used Filmic Pro. So even though the PRORES LT is 7 times larger compared to the H.264 or the H.265, I think that there are some scenarios where it makes sense to use the PRORES. So first of all, obviously you have to have a little bit of space on your iPhone, and in the case that you are doing a project where you need the full control of the image and you have a little bit of time to set up the shots, I think that in this case the PRORES is a good choice. And since we are talking about a project, I can think for example a short film, you can use a gimbal to avoid the slightly inferior stabilization. Then another case where you should use the PRORES is when you have planned to do an heavy color grading on your footage, because again the PRORES is 10-bit, so it's a type of file that is very good to color grade. Also remember that there are in the PRORES less bending and other artifacts, so for example if you are planning to do a further noise reduction, the PRORES is a good choice. And then the last scenario that I can think about it is when you are editing not with a newer computer but with an older computer, because an advantage to work with the PRORES is that the computer can transcode really easily these files, so your editing workflow will be flawlessly. But when you should not use this PRORES, because obviously is not for everyone. Okay, first of all, I think that of course if you don't have a lot of space on your iPhone, do not use the PRORES, because as I told you, it's a very angry data type of video, and this is particularly true if you don't plan to use a third-party app. Then another big reason is when you need the best stabilization without any accessories, because as I told you, the stabilization in the native camera app is quite a bit better compared to the third-party app. Then on the opposite to having an older computer, computer. If you have an M1 or above computer, you can easily skip the ProRes because you know that that computer works really well with the newer codec like the H.265. And then for last, if you have planned to avoid completely the color grading process, I think that using the ProRes makes no sense. So guys, let's jump to the conclusion. And first of all, I really hope that I could help you to figure out better this ProRes codec. But above all, you have to know that the limitation on the 128 gigs models is a big lie. In fact, for all the tests that you have saw in 4K, I've used not a 256 gigs model, but my 128 gigs model. Because when you're using a third-party app, you can unlock basically all the resolution and frame rate of the ProRes in these apps. For example, you can shoot at 4K at 60 frames per second in ProRes. That is a thing that you cannot do it in a 256 model. And after this, I think that in the future, for all the projects that I need the full control of the videos, I will use this ProRes codec. And to fix the slightly inferior stabilization, I will simply use a gimbal. Because I was pleased to learn that there are areas where the ProRes is better compared to the most common codecs. But for every other scenarios, I think that the ProRes is totally overkill and you should stick with the H.265 that could create a good compromise between file size and image quality. That's it for this video, guys. If you are shooting not only videos but also photos with your iPhone, check out my iPhone preset that you can find more info in the link below. Don't forget to check out all the other videos that I made on the iPhone 14 Pro, like the video dedicated only on the action mode. Follow me on Instagram to see behind the scenes content and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!